Welcome back to another recording of the Israel Connection, a live session where we unpack current events in Israel and focus on major events as part of a conversation. My name is Dean Baghdadi, and I'm the senior Shaliach at Pozez JCC. Let's begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Israel Connection. It's great seeing you all for this lovely Monday. And a lot had happened throughout the weekend, not even the week. And in addition to that, this will also be the last session for the upcoming month because next week is Labor Day weekend. So Mondays we are all off. And just a few days after, we'll be in Israel visiting our family for 3 weeks. We are going to do one special the Israel Connection live from Israel on the 18th September, same time. And apart from that, also I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about everything that's going to be happening in September rather than just everything that happened in the past week. But there's still a lot that has happened, and we want to cover at least the most interesting ones. And also I wanted to give you the opportunity to just go and raise one other topic that comes to mind that you want me to talk about, and we can have a little bit of discussion right before the end. So without further ado, we'll start with the first thing that was on every Israeli media headline today, and it's the historical meeting. Earlier this week, we've seen a reporting coming in from Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, providing news, headline news, historical news regarding to a meeting conjoined by the Foreign Affairs Minister of Israel and the Foreign Minister of Libya, trying to engage in relationship, talking about trading, technological advantages, and economical development relationships. And at the same time, also a complete disaster from the other side. And that's also brings in another depth to this conversation that I want to discuss a little bit, which is what we refer to Israel as push versus print media. If you look at the newspapers this morning from Israel, the headlines will be the historical meeting. Newspapers receive updates until like 11 a.m. at night, 11:30 maybe, and afterwards they close the printing and start working on printing for the next morning. Therefore, all the headlines that came out from newspapers were about the historical meeting and how well it did. Meanwhile, during the night, what seems to be happening on the other side, on Libya's side, is actually a complete disaster. What we've actually seen is that after the headlines that was revealed by the Israeli minister, he actually caused riots in Libya because of that meeting, causing people to literally riot over the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Hi, Phyllis, you're joining in.
I kept on losing.
It's okay, just join in. We have Phyllis joining in live for the session. You're more than welcome.
Thank you.
So as I would start saying, on the Israeli side, what happened through the night is that we saw the Minister of Foreign Affairs giving headlines to the newspaper saying how well the meeting went and how this is a beginning of a relationship that will be very much successful with Libya, might lead in the future for another normalizations agreement with another very big Arab country, the fourth largest in Africa, in the African continent. And on the other hand, on the Libyan side, we've seen that this notion, this almost kind of like slip that was not supposed to be published, caused the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to resign. She was actually, first off, was punished for meeting with him, causing protests regarding to the meeting with an Israeli, a Zionist entity representative, or just an Israeli minister. People actually protesting over the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Tripoli, in Libya. And an inquiry committee was initiated to investigate the whole thing. of how could the Libyan a Libyan representative meet with an Israeli representative without no formal relationship, which clearly dictates that this was supposed to be remain a secret. This was not meant to be published to the headlines, and there is a lot of criticism going towards Eli Cohen, Israel's Minister of Foreign Affairs, saying, why did you do that? Why did you publish those news? Why did you go so quickly just for a quick win over media? Well, what it caused actually in Libya is for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that met with you to literally refuge to Turkey for her life because she is now being threatened over meeting with Israel. And if you look at the newspapers that came out this morning in Israel, all of them are saying historical meeting. If you look at the news medias online, all of them are saying historical disaster. And I find that to be very, very interesting as well to the relationship between print and push media. Push media, obviously, I'm referring to online media, whether it's social media or just online update news, whether it's on their websites or applications that some of us uses, versus the newspaper, the print newspapers, and how it cannot even keep up anymore with the news, right? And if you think about it, Israel and Libya doesn't have that much of a time difference. All of that happened through, let's say, between 11 a.m. to maybe 6 a.m. in the morning, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., which is in the span of about 7 hours. They were managed to riot over the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to made the foreign minister to resign. She will refuge for her life to Turkey, and an inquiry committee was initiated to investigate the whole thing. This is how badly things have deteriorated that quickly. And that also gives you a bit of a hint regarding to how complex Israel's foreign affairs really are, and what seems to be a really bad job that Israel is doing. Israel's Minister of Foreign Affairs, specifically the minister, is doing right now. We're trying to engage in such complex relationship. Yes, Gabe, go ahead.
I'm curious, is the belief right now that the protests were organic, that is, arising from versus deliberately provoked by people with an agenda, with an axe to grind, who want to either just create chaos or want to prevent anything like normalization of relations with it. It seems that for it to arise that quickly, that somebody may have had to spill gasoline and then throw a match on the gasoline versus just letting things proceed. I mean, especially with relations with Israel, with so many other countries in the area, what was going on with Libya seems hardly out of the ordinary.
Regarding to the specific questions of what was this organized or not, I am not the person to answer that. I'm sure it will be very difficult to get an answer for that. I will say that it seems that from the response, officials from Libya's ministry that we've seen, they are not taking it very well at all. Whether it's the prime minister, whether it's the Congress, whether it's every single elected officials. And also, interestingly enough, there seems to be a meeting. Well, in the meeting that was going, they were also seems to be talking about not specifically the situation of the Jewish community that exists in Libya, which apparently is not that well known of and not that big at all, but mostly about conservation of Jewish sites in Libya. That was also part of the conversation. And that might also create another volume regarding to the relationship, because of the notion that some of those institutes are now being turning into Islamic structures, right, preserved for religious purposes. You're saying that someone spilling gasoline and throwing the matches, that whole area is filled with gasoline already flowing over the floor. That is the area. It is very, very easy to spark things up so quickly, especially with considering Libya's past. right? It was a dictatorship until 2011 with Gaddafi. That was eventually removed. I don't know if this was by the US or I don't know who was involved in all the incidents of 2011, in which the dictatorship of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, um, I don't recall what actually happened to him. Was he overthrown? He was executed.
I think the crowd.
I think he was executed. Yeah, I think he was executed, overthrown and executed afterwards.
Yeah.
After that, Libya was was unstable and still is very much unstable. There are actually two uh, um, autonomous identities right now operating around Libya, and this one was with Tripoli, was with the northern part of Libya, and obviously there is a lot of tension existing at the moment. If you look closely into the Arab world, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is always in the middle of all discussions, especially if you're around the Middle Eastern area, especially if you're close to Israel. And that's obviously something that was always going to be controversial, every type of relationship with Israel, especially because what's happening with just in general the Palestinian conflict, and specifically this right-wing government, uh, which may lead us to the other headlines that I'm going to talk to, which is another thing that happened throughout the week. But it is not very difficult to spark flames. Nonetheless, some intentional actions to cause people to riot. It is very, very easy at the moment to spark uh, tensions. And that's the situation. That's the reality in most Arab countries, especially after the Arab Spring. All of them are very, very unstable. Um, and it's just complicated, yes. And whether or not this will eventually lead to a stronger relationship between Israel and Libya, at the moment, it seems that no, that would not be the case. Not at least, nonetheless, we see like an advancements with the relationship with Saudi Arabia, a very large Arabic country and a leader of the Arab world. If that will be the case, then I'm assuming the relationship might change or create like another opportunity for a discussion. But uh, this was a really bad incident for Israel, a really bad incident for Libya as well, internally and externally. And we'll have to see what happens with this one next. But it is just another slip up from Israel's foreign affairs in the recent couple of weeks that we have seen. Um, and it is very, very complicated. Yes. More questions, comments, reactions? Go ahead. Has any of you heard about those news prior to me speaking about it?
No,
Interesting.
that's the interesting thing. That I was thinking this had actually been a very quiet week.
This happened this morning. This is like all of those, except from the one from the Times of Israel, which I tried to look for the headlines that were published before what happened throughout the night. The two of them from the Jerusalem Post and BBC are from this morning, uh, like internationally. So yes, it's a very, very recent, very new event, and that will take us to the other headlines that I wanted to discuss, and it is the religious Zionism in general, and specifically what happened between Ben Gvir and his international slip up, or uh, just out loud racism instead of his usual trying to get ahead and hide between legal terms. But yes, so the other controversial things that happened this week was in midst of an interview for Ben Gvir, Israel's Minister of Internal Security, National Security, essentially the person who is in charge over the police, has said in an interview that his rights for security topples the rights of Arabs for movement. A very controversial thing to say, and nonetheless, in the same studio that he was saying it, there was an Arab reporter right next to him, Muhammad Majadla from Channel 12. And he turned to him and says, "Sorry, Muhammad," and then continue talking. which is just an obscene and very, very terrible, a very miserable saying as well, coming from Ben-Gvir, but not surprising considering his background. But this one has caused international waves. Not very short afterward, we've seen Bella Hadid, an American supermodel, and also a very big supporter of Free Palestine movement and BDS actions towards Israel, has addressed specifically Ben-Gvir's notion of saying one right cannot topple the other. You cannot go and say that your rights are over someone else's rights. That's literally what everything that we're trying to say is true. And that is a big blow for Israel. That is a huge blow. Some people are calling it even pigua hasbarati, a terror action over Israel's ability for foreign affairs. It is that poorly stated and poorly structured and poorly mentioned that he didn't even take it back and apologize or repent. He just went forward with it, continued saying that his rights for security and his family and kids' rights for security topples the Arabs' rights for movement in Judea and Samaria. A very, very poorly thing to say. And that is not surprising when it comes from Ben-Gvir. That is definitely a big part of his identity. He is a former member of an acknowledged terror organization in Israel called Kach. He's been slurring with racial terms numerous times, not apologizing for each one of them, and at the same time, with a legal background of dealing with those types of slurs on a daily basis, he is very well equipped to then defend his statements or go in between the very delicate line by saying, I didn't address this, I was addressing this. And he's very, very talented with knowing how to say things that will be super controversial and at the same time defend it in court. Now, obviously, this has sparked headlines in BBC, New York Times, and we've seen several of those reoccurring throughout the week. And there almost seems to be an engaging battle between him, and her over social media, trying to like react to each other, which is just an obscene thing to see, and it was obviously very problematic for a lot of Israelis. We've seen a small condemns coming from Israeli government, something so insignificant that it didn't really even spark headlines. Most of them are even saying that the government has supported Ben-Gvir's saying, but this is just another notion for this right-wing government of engaging in controversial issues and just go plainly as right as possible without being apologetic about it. And that's only deteriorating Israel's already deteriorating foreign affairs to go even worse. The US government has obviously condemned Ben-Gvir's comments. Other countries have followed, and without a proper response coming from Israel. He defended what he was saying and he keeps sticking with his position. But it is a very troubling thing to see, especially as an Israeli. Now, to this incident itself, there's not a lot to talk about. There's not a big discussion that can be raised towards this one because this is obviously something that is very wrong. But I did wanted to take this as an opportunity to really talk about religious Zionism as a party and the religious Zionism as a movement. And really to try and trace back with you, how did it come to this? How is this the face of religious Zionism? What have changed throughout the years? Because that wasn't the case throughout Israel's history. As short as it is, it's going to be very complicated. Now, I'm going to go through 75 years of political conflicts with you in one party. I'm going to try to do it in 10 minutes. So be patient, keep up, and please stop me if you have any questions. But I think going through the story of specifically the religious Zionism party will enable you to see what changes throughout that movement. Now, of course, when we're referring to the religious Zionism, we're referring to the religious Zionists, people who identify as religious Zionists, kind of like an in-between groups between Haredi and secular folks, um, always almost identified with the conservative movement in Israel, in the US, but not necessarily being as a point of mediation in terms of religiousness, and also being very Zionist and pro serving your country. I know how this looks. We're going to start with the beginning. Our first party on the right is called the Mafdal, which was the National Religious Party. It was constructed in 1956, and it was essentially the representative of the religious movement. They were a very right-wing agenda in terms of settlements and in terms of security, but were very left-wing in terms of economy. They were a very social party in terms of investing in social infrastructures. And that party, the Mafdal, Religious National Party, was part of the Knesset and was part of an ongoing coalitions from one at a time. Obviously, we're not going to go through the political changes that have changed, but we're going to talk specifically about the parties. And while the Mafdal was continued to existing, sometimes contributing to a coalition and existing as part of a coalition, sometimes being opposition, in 1999, we've seen the National Union rise. The National Union rise is a more right-wing extension of the Mafdal. They were running as two separate parties. Obviously, the Mafdal being pro-settlements, pro-Israel as a whole country, not two-state solution, but at the same time a very social as well, and a mediator in terms of kind of like the religious conflict between the secular majority and between the Orthodox minority in Israel at that time. The National Union that was established in 1999 was a more right-wing one, both in economical views and in religious views, being referred to as what we say Haredi Leumi, National Orthodox, which means orthodox in beliefs, but also serving the countries in terms of contributing to society, national security, and etc. The two of them conjoined to create Ichud Leumi HaMafdal in 2006, which essentially was trying to be the representative of the entire religious Zionist movement. Everyone who supported the settlements, everyone who supported security over remote settlements in Judea and Samaria, and folks who live there as well. Ichud Leumi HaMafdal in 2006 have rebranded themselves as the Jewish Home, Habayit HaYehudi, in 2008. And by that time, we've started seeing emerging stars like Bennett, Smotrich, and others that are now part of the current events in Israel. Smotrich is very much a representative of the National Union, which is the more right-wing part of that whole Zionist party. And Bennett was more representative of the Mafdal, or more it's called the more balanced right. Still, both of them supports the settlement. Still, both of them supports annexation. But of course, there is a very big spectrum and a very vast spectrum of opinions, even for the right of that political scale. Now, the Habayit HaYehudi, the Jewish Home, have separated into two parties. The Jewish Home has remained a party, and Smotrich has become its leader. And it was ejected. It's ejected the right wing, the new right, which was Bennett party in the 2018-2019 election. Bennett, Ayelet Shaked, and they kind of like prescribed a more center-right, still religious part of the general political map, while the Jewish Home, Habayit HaYehudi, has remained more right-wing, aligning both economically as well as right-wing. And that's where we're seeing a more development of what it is today, which is the religious Zionism. Hayamin Chadash, right-wing, the one that was constructed by 2018, with Bennett being its leader, Ayelet Shaked being the co-chair, and they've exchanged position between different elections, have rebranded themselves as Yamina, simply going right, and which also was the party which Bennett led that essentially gave him the prime minister sits with 8 seats of the Knesset, something that was unprecedented, and was part of the recent co-joint coalition, being the very right edge of that central left, central right coalition. And that's Yamina, right, with Bennett. At the same time, the National Abayta Yehudi, the Jewish House, Smotrich's party, with other representatives of the religious Zionist movement, which again, the majority of them remained with the Jewish home, has went back to become the National Union, which was it what it was before the Mafdal, the more right-wing part of the religious Zionist political map, and has co-joined with Jewish Power, Ben-Gvir's party. Now, Ben-Gvir's party, Jewish Power, Otzma Yehudit, was previously known as the Jewish National Front, a very right-wing, extreme right-wing party that was even disqualified to participate under supporting terror or not following the guidelines of Israel's democratic nature. From time to time, they were disqualified. Some other times, they just didn't pass the threshold and will remain a very, very small, kind of like niche party on the extreme right, on the very top of the extreme right. But on 2015, becoming Jewish Power and starting to gain popularity, Ben-Gvir's party has eventually co-joined with the National Union, Smotrich's party, to create the religious Zionism, who ran in 2021. Now, if you look at the distribution of votes in terms of how many people are actually supporting this kind of like constructive parties, Damafdal, in its previous positions, the initial party was very, very big and was gaining a lot of different seats. Yamina, in the previous elections, 2019, Bennett's party has gained 8 seats at the Knesset. No, it was even less. I think it was 6 seats. Right? Each seat at the Knesset is about 30,000 votes. 30,000 votes. So let's call it about 180,000 votes. All right? That's Bennett's, which means the more soft central right, but not as right as religious Zionism, but still very right-wing folks. The religious Zionism, as itself, got 8 seats from recent elections, which is, again, much more than that. Let's say it's about 200, let's call it about 250,000 votes. That's a lot of votes. That's a lot of people. But in the previous elections, we saw that Yamina, the more balanced right-wing party, has eventually vanished. Bennett exiting the political life after being a prime minister for 1 year, and the toppling of the coalition, which was caused by his party members quitting, eventually led to the destruction of Yamina. And I'm sorry for being cynical and placing the trash icon on it, but that just happened to be the case. They didn't even pass the threshold, which is 4 seats. They were very, very low below that. And all of those votes that came from central right people, to the extreme right, religious Zionism, which gained him in the previous election, the one that led to this coalition, 13 seats, also as a conjoint effort with the Jewish Power, Ben-Gvir's party, meaning that they were the third largest party in the political map of Israel, only topped by the Likud and Gantz's and Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid's party, the largest opposition party. Now, that type of kind of like extreme flow towards the right wing and the development of the Mafdal gives you a closer look to what that movement has gone through, has shifted towards. Now, there's still a lot of religious Zionist people who identify as religious Zionists, that are just not supportive of those parties. But the way Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have rebranded their parties as the religious Zionism, as the home of all of those who identify as the religious Zionists, obviously gain them a lot of advantage and a lot of votes when it comes to elections. And in addition to that, in the recent actions that they were making, previous to that, during the elections, their biggest promise was security. And that's because a lot of residents of Judea and Samaria, people who live in Hebron, people who live in Ariel, and in other big cities and small cities of Judea and Samaria, controversial as much as that would be, essentially and eventually felt insecure. And that goes to a lot of folks living in the southern part of Israel as well, and people who live in the northern part of Israel, feeling insecure regarding to a lot of security incidents happening and emerging to Jewish citizens. And when they play the security card and run full security, that was one of their biggest wins eventually, because people do look for security. Now, in addition to that, their alignment with the right economical view as well, which is Smotrich's agenda essentially as the Minister of Treasury, was also about reducing governmental expenses, which might lead to the reduction of cost of living. So for you as a party, addressing the two main issues every single citizen in Israel is experiencing, security and cost of living, then you're definitely promising something that people want to hear about. And with the topple of the other options for right-wing folks that don't want to vote for the Likud, because the Likud is not actually promoting any right-wing agendas anymore. It is becoming very conservative, meaning it's not trying to change anything, but to conserve the already existing position. Then your only option became the religious Zionism as a party, with Ben Gvir, part of that party, with Jewish power. They were essentially leaving no choice for right-wing folks that do not believe in other parties to then go and vote for them. Now, I don't want for a second to justify anyone who voted for Smotrich or Ben Gvir saying they didn't have a choice. That's not what I'm trying to say. Every person is responsible for his actions, and every voter is a knowledgeable voter, and eventually what they vote for has consequences, and that's repercussions we have to live as a people now in Israel. But I did want to give you a closer look to that specific part of the right in the political sphere of Israel, something that is not very covered as well in social media, because again, it goes to a very niche crowd. But was meant to cover some of the ongoing battles that we've seen. And obviously, as you can see, for a very small part of Israel's political map, there is a lot of changes. There is a lot of different stages and different shifts and movements over a very, very narrow crowd that eventually led to the situation as it is today. And it's a lot to take in. We've gone through 75 years of conflicts into a very small crowd, still trying to capture what's happening today and give it a bit of an historical introduction. Please go ahead with questions, comments, reactions. And for the people who will listen to this as a recorder version, I'm sorry. You can't see the map. That's probably going to be even more complicated for you to follow up. Yes, go ahead, Phyllis.
Yeah, I've got a question, and this is my ignorance.
Of course.
Showing. But now the Likud is still for a two-state solution?
Likud hasn't had an agenda in 10 years
Okay.
of elections.
So is there anybody who is still propagating a two-state solution? Or is it all the push to occupy, increase Israeli settlements?
Two-state solution or one-state solution, you meant? You meant one-state solution.
No, I mean, the ultra-Orthodox want one state, don't they? I mean, they want an Israeli state.
The ultra-Orthodox don't care about security.
Yeah.
They care about the Jewish nature of Israel.
Right. Okay.
Who cared about the settlements was the religious Zionism part, which is a different social group.
Okay.
Obviously advocating for more constructions over the settlements and eventually annexation. That was the religious Zionism part. Okay. Likud, as a right-wing party, originally was promoting a one-state solution, but as a centrist party, obviously, when you're becoming such a large party, you can't actually pull to the right or to the left too much. You become a very centrist one. It just was more about conserving the situation as it is. And this is essentially Netanyahu's leadership over the past 10 years, is just to conserve things as they are, not changing too much. And specifically regarding annexation or concessions, there were some announcements regarding to the Golan Heights, saying that they will remain a part of Israel, which is not that much of a conflict at all when regarding what specifically we're talking about, right? About the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, more about the Judea and Samaria. But specifically in Judea and Samaria, we have seen some more constructions over settlements, but at the same time, there was never actually a big drastic move towards like one or the other. Religious Zionism, on the other hand, specifically Smotrich and Ben Gvir, are big supporters of annexation. And now, as members of the coalition, they're promoting this agenda by building more settlements, announcing more settlements as part of the Judea and Samaria. But it's still, this is not annexation coming into place. This is such a complicated situation as it is, whether we're talking about A territories, B territories, C territories, one that are under the PA rule, one that are conjoined, one that are by an army rule. All of them are very, very complicated. At the moment, what we are seeing is more contribution to rebuilding settlements, promoting more settlements to be announced and recognized by the State of Israel, and more efforts to deteriorate the authority of the Palestinian Authority in a territory, in the major cities, which is Jenin, Nablus, and others. So, with that being said, I wanted to talk a little bit about September. We're going to be flying into Israel in 2 weeks from now, right after Labor Day weekend. We're very excited about this as well. And at the same time, this is going to be such a troubling time politically to be in Israel. The Knesset is going to go back to legislating. It's going to be going back for the winter seat. There's going to be discussions in the Supreme Courts regarding the reasonableness bill and other bills that were passed by the Knesset. Specifically, if you want to mark the date, September 12th, Israel will see the discussion happening in Supreme Courts regarding the specific reasonableness bill and whether or not the Supreme Court can overrule the decision made by the Knesset. I will remind you all that the reasonableness bill is a basic law that was legislated. A basic law is kind of like a replacement for a constitution in Israel, was never being discussed in court. This will be the first time that the court will have to discuss the legislation of a basic law, and therefore electing all existing members of the Supreme Court, all 15 Supreme judges, to be present in that discussion. That is September 12th, and we're going to be having a very interesting Zoom session on September 18th, live from Israel, where we're probably going to talk a lot about this. Now, in addition to the discussion in the Supreme Courts, we're probably going to see protests re-emerging in much more strength. By the way, still ongoing every single week, every Saturday night for the 30th week or so, maybe even more than that, which just gives you a really big notion of how pissed off people in Israel really are about the whole situation, about right-wing government, and about action taken specifically around the judiciary. And all of those headlines that we've discussed in the past week are not going to help the government proclaim that they're doing this for the citizens. And at the same time, as a right-wing supporters, as right-wing voters, I'm sure that it is becoming very, very complicated to still being a supporter of the coalition. And it's just going to be a complicated month. Not like the other months that were like super easy, but yes, it's going to be very, very interesting. And at the same time, also happy for us personally, because we'd love to go back and visit family and friends and enjoy vegetables that has flavor. I'm sorry to tell you this, but vegetables in the US just taste worse than in Israel. That's just seems to be the case. And it's kind of like a mixed emotion flight for us, both about what's happening, but also on the personal level. It is very, very exciting. And a lot is changing in the year in general years. A lot has changed specifically in this year, 2022, 2023. Um, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see how things are. I've been reporting very closely on what's happening. I've never been reporting from the ground. It's always been trying to keep up with media here, always try hearing what people else are experiencing, trying to talk to people that live in Israel, covering Israeli media and international media, but never in person for the past year. And this will be a very interesting one as well.
I have a question about that.
Golda
What
movie.
is a good book to read about what really happened at the Yom Kippur War? Oh, I asked what book would he recommend to get a really good picture of what happened during the Yom Kippur War? Because I saw the movie also, and of course I was unfamiliar with that whole backstory, and so I would like to read up on it without getting too confused.
I know that there is a good show on Netflix, an Israeli show that prescribes specifically the fightings of Yom Kippur, following like um, a special group. I think it's called the Tear Valley on Netflix. You can see it. It's an Israeli production show that was recently, I think it was bought by Netflix for screening. The name in Hebrew is Shat Ne'ilah, the hour of locking, essentially addressing that specific time of the sirens went was on Yom Kippur, Shat Ne'ilah. But most of the happening is in Tir Valley in the Golan Heights, Emek HaBacha. And I think that that's the name of the show as well on Netflix. So if you want to take a closer look about the fighting, specifically the fightings, um, Tier Valley is a good recommendation. And also one more interesting thing, and that was it wasn't addressed at all at the movie, and I think that was good because it's too much complexity in one film. But Golda was a very controversial figure in Israeli politics. She is known to be a huge a hero amongst like the global jury when regarding the Yom Kippur War, but she was also the prime minister when a lot of Mizrahi Jews were discriminated against, Jews that came from Arab countries. Specifically, one group that was heavily influenced by the Black Panther movement here in the US, called the Panterim Shchorim, the Black Panther, was addressed by Golda by saying they're not nice. And this is not just Golda, this is the Israeli government. Oof, that was a rough one. The Israeli government over the passing years after the aliyah of Mizrahi Jews, Jews that came from Arab, that they were treated racefully and discriminately, receiving less opportunities and obviously being treated as second-class citizens over those years of the 70s and 80s. And Golda is also renowned for being a marking of that for Mizrahi Jews in Israel. A controversial figure, yet still the only female woman prime minister in Israel who led the victory that started with the huge failure of the Yom Kippur War. She is a very, very complex figure. I'm sure on the personal level, she had a very heavy load as well to lift with all of that conjoined together. And we cannot just ignore the fact that it was a very patriarch system as well, being a lone woman with a government filled with men. I'm sure that this is another level of complexity that was kind of like covered in the movie. They were addressing it in several different occasions regarding to that specific issues of being a woman amongst men. But there's also a very big notion in Israel saying that at the moment, and I'm sorry for my language, as a lone female in a government of men, she's the one that had the most balls. But still, a very good movie. I was surprised to see a filled a filled crowd when we went to see it yesterday. We went to see it at the Angelic Theater in Mosaic, and the room was filled with people coming to see it. That was remarkable. And also on the personal level, seeing all those Israeli actors on American screen in an American theater, it was very emotional for us, and it was very exciting. We're happy about it. Thank you all. I'm looking forward to seeing you at September 18th for a special Israel Connection Live from Israel that we'll do. And apart from that, have a wonderful rest of your week. Have a wonderful high holidays as well, if we're not going to see each other. I wish you all Rosh Hashanah Tova, happy Rosh Hashanah, and a meaningful Yom Kippur. And I'll see you on the 18th.